Hi there, I'm Harkin from Harks Paints, and you're watching a tutorial on how to paint something utterly disgusting. So the last time that we did a Harks Paints video, I believe it was the Goliath Forgeborn, I mentioned that in the next video I was going to be doing Plague Marines. Well, I lied, partly because I've been away for so long. In the time I've been away, I've learned a lot of new techniques, lots of new, bits and bobs that I've kind of added to my painting repertoire, and that's what I really want to bring to you today. I thought what would really be a much more positive approach to showing you a Nurgle pipeline would actually be a new pipeline I've been developing, which is for Blight Kings. There's going to be a bit of airbrushing with this one, which is on Harks Paints first. There will be another video which is just a kind of a general tutorial for airbrushing. Follow along as much as you like. I know some of you prefer it where it's just the bare basics, but I found I get some really good results with airbrushing, and I encourage you to go out and try it yourself if you can get a cheap airbrush. Okay, so without further ado, let's dive in.
First things first, you know the drill, guys. Let's get your primer out.
Now remember, when you're priming your model, you want to get a really nice finish of it. We're working on a Chaos Black primer here, so you want to make sure that your primer is roughly as black as this cat. So you need to get a good all over like black, okay?
Now I'm fairly new to airbrushing, but so most of this is, fairly basic stuff. What I'm going to start off with here is the flesh tones. So, the guy is primarily flesh tone. So I'm going to use Gamer's Barbarian Flesh, and I'm just going to go over all the areas and give him a nice clean coat. And once that's all dried and ready to go, I'm going to do my highlights. Again, I'm just going to use the Barbarian Flesh, but this time with 1 part Barbarian Flesh and 1 part Dead White. Again, Gamer, nice and simple. Just get it in there and go over the raised parts of the flesh to really bring him to life. Now once that's done, we're going to use Vallejo's Mecha colours. This is the metallic green, and I'm just going to go over all of his armour. Now I appreciate that these bits look a little bit out there and vibrant for a Nurgle dude, but just remember this is just the initial colour, okay? So get him on his boots, get him on his shoulder pad, let's just get that kind of nice metallic green out there. Okay, with that done, I'm going to do the last pass for my airbrushing before I move on to the brush. I'm just going to use some Stonewall Grey, again, Vallejo Gamer, and I'm just going to quickly go over the base and make sure that I've got a nice prime layer there. Alright, so let's get down to actually painting. You can't go wrong with Agrax Earthshade, so I'm going to use that to start tidying up some of the gaps around the armour and the flesh. So we want to get it in all the places you'd expect to see some shading, the moobs, the creases of the arm, the joints. Just really get in there and get a layer going. We're going to really layer up the flesh with a lot of different colours and tones, so you'll probably be coming back to the Agrax a couple of times, but just get them in the flabs, alright? Okay, so with that out the way, we're now going to go back and tidy up a couple of areas. Again, I've just got my Vallejo metallic green here, and I'm just going over all the areas I missed out or any areas that were a little bit too fiddly, and I'm just going to neaten up the model and make sure that everything is nice and uniform. Flip side, obviously, if you go onto the flesh with the green, just make sure you get a flesh tone and deal with it. Whoa, would you look at that? Deepkin flesh. Alright, so this is the next stage of your skin, yeah? You're going to go over all of the raised areas with the deepkin. You don't need a huge amount, just make sure that you've got the paint nice and fluid. We're not dry brushing this on or anything. We just want to have fun here and go over those nice big areas and start to get some like real variance in the way that it actually appears. And don't worry if it looks a little bit out of place at this phase. You can always touch back up with more washes as we go forward. Alright, so our model is starting to take shape now, as you can see. So we're going to move on to some of the slightly more fiddly aspects of making this come to life. So let's really change it up now, okay? We want to really breathe some horrible life into the horrible death of this dude. We're going to use Caribou Crimson to go over all of the welts and exposed areas of flesh, and we're also going to use a little bit of it on our brush just to go over some of the folds again, just to get like a nice kind of sickly, gross flesh tone in there. Just make sure, you've got a little bit of water on the tip of your brush before you do it so you can really move it around and thin it on the fly. But experiment, try it out, see how you do. Okay, so here's one I did earlier. You notice how I've got this kind of mottled green look to it? This was by loading a Thonian camo shade into my airbrush and very gently going over it. Now you can, use as much or as little as you like. I quite like to experiment with it just in my airbrush rather than doing it on the brush itself. But I found by doing it this way that I could really kind of, I don't know, I just found it a lot easier to apply it to the flesh and get this kind of good mix between the base flesh tone and a not necessarily over the top green tint to the flesh that, well, obviously it's a Nurgle, dude, you can't go wrong with gross green. So moving on, we've got Galvaback Red here, which I'm now going to go and apply into all of the wounds, which is the first stage of the process that I do for all of like the open wounds and welts that you see on these guys. So just go to town, get it in there, and then let it dry off. I'm also going to use this on the scraps and rags that this guy's got, so feel free just to pop that in there. When that's all dry, I've got Emperor's Children pink here, and I just get a very light dry application of that and go over the wounds. Same with the guts as well, I just want to really bring it out. Next, Blood for the Blood God Technical, can't go wrong with all of that dry. Just get some of that on a palette, mix in 2 parts water so it's not quite as thick and you can still see the underlying colour, and then just go over all of your wound areas. Use as much or as little as you want. I mean, hell, you can just go straight for the Blood God if you want, but each to their own. Okay, so next, Hash Hut Copper is going to be applied onto some of the more detailed areas of the armour. The Nurgle fly symbol and the little ringlets on his loincloth. And once that's done, we're then going to take Nuln Oil and do what Nuln Oil was born for. Like I said before, I don't want the armour too bright. I mean, it's a Nurgle dude, for Christ's sake. So I'm going to go over it with the Nuln Oil and just darken that down without losing the metallic sheen. Next up, Dryad Bark. The guy's got straps that keep his armour in place that go across his chest and back. He's got a big wooden handle on his axe. I believe there's also some straps underneath the bracer and on the, well, of course, his horns. So we're just going to go over and do a general application, a base layer of the Dryad Bark. Alright, so let's talk horns. So I've got this drinking horn here because I'm clearly so cool, and you can see that the way that the colour travels, it goes from kind of quite a light blonde down to a much darker colour on the grain. This is something I've replicated on other Nurgle models by using a Shabbaty bone at the bottom of it. You can see here, here's one I did earlier, where I've just worked it in with a very wet brush to try and get that kind of look that you would expect to see from a horn. So that's what we're going to do here. With our wet brush, you can see I've got a palette of little water there. I'm just going to take a little bit of Shabbaty bone, not much, just a tiny, tiny amount. And then I'm going to go and work it into the grain of our horns and spikes. We want to make them look nice and blended. We're not going over the top with this or getting crazy. We just want to gradually work it in and then highlight the bottom of the spike and the horn to try and give them the appearance of something that you'd see on, like a large Highland cow. Once that's dried off, take Screaming Skull, because it's a tone a tad lighter, and just go over those bottom bits. Even it out, even if you have to blend it in a bit more. With that out of the way, let's move on. I've got some Liquitex acrylic ink here. This is Burnt Sienna. I'm going to be using this for a couple of different bits and bobs in a moment, but before that, while my horns are drying, I'm just going to go and identify some areas where he's got these big kind of pustules and spots and use a bit of Uriel Yellow to go over them and just give them their initial layer. So once all of those are on, we can come back to them and highlight as necessary. Anyway, in the meantime, another job that needs doing while other areas are drying. Let's just take some Dryad Bark, get the leather thongs or string around the skulls. I've already dealt with those earlier, so that's all good to go. Now, with everything dried off, we can go back to washes, and this is where we're going to use our Liquitex acrylic ink. So, I'm going to take a tiny bit of this on my brush, and I'm going to go over the spots and just apply to the center of the spot so that it flows out around the zit, essentially giving it just like the right amount of coloring and the right amount of a kind of shading around the area of it. It gives you this nice kind of like sickly browny effect, and obviously it washes the yellow as well. While I've got it, I'm going to wet my brush and I'm going to work it into the grain of my horns and spikes. And really just, you know, get it up and down, just keep it fluid, use some water to keep it moving, let it pool around the base, but don't get it, you know, all over the place on your green armor. Just really work it into those areas. Okay, so now let's go over some of the wood and the leather. All I'm going to use is Baneblade Brown, nice and easy, just a bit of dry brushing there. Pop that on, just, you know, give it a little bit of variance, because now it's, well, it's no longer just a dull brown. With that out of the way, let's get some Druchii Violet. I'm going to wash around the wounded and infected looking areas. I know the guy's 90% infected, but you get the general idea. And I'm also going to work it into not only some of the wounds, but into some of the flesh areas as well. So feel free to put that in some of the fat folds. And if you're, you know, feeling particularly adventurous, you can try different bits and bobs elsewhere, like the Agrax Earthshade here, which I'm going to work into some of the areas such as, again, the flab folds, and into areas such as the skulls and some of the leather as well. Now, this is Pallid Witch Flesh. I'm taking a very tiny amount of it and I'm applying it around the wounds. This is to make the flesh look kind of, well, dead. I don't know if you've ever looked at a semi-infected wound or cut you might have had, but you'll notice that the dead flesh around it tends to go quite white. So you don't need to use a huge amount. Alright, let's move on to the weapons and the chainmail skirt. We're going to use Typhus Corrosion because it automatically gives it a nice texture. And just apply it and let it dry on and, you know, just give it 5. While that's happening, I'm going to take a little bit of Stormhost Silver, and again, this is just me multitasking really, and I'm going to take it to the edges of the armor. I want to start, you know, making it look a bit more chipped and a bit more out there, so I'm just going to go over the very edges and highlight it with the Stormhost. Now you can feel free to try and create some scratches with this, but I'm not going too overboard because I'll be using Riser Rust in a moment. So, Riser Rust, get in there for those pock marks and just have fun with applying it to the metal. The guy has seen some battles, he's gross, he has not washed in a very long time, so feel free to just scuff him up, rust him up however you see fit. You know, experiment, explore. There's a little bit of dry brushing going on here as well, just to add a little variance to the colour. Just have fun with it. While all that's drying, I'm going to take some corn red now and go back over the, what would you even call that, rags, a loincloth, a failed nappy, I don't know. Either way, you're going to go over that and you're going to highlight it and you're going to like it. Okay, so all of that's nice and dried now, so let's get down to stippling. This is Mournfang Brown. I'm just going to put a little bit on a sponge, get the majority of the texture off, and then apply it. Then I'm going to follow up, same again, barely any on my sponge. This is Wild Rider Red. You can do this with Riser Rust if you want, or any other orange tone, but I'm just going to go over it and really just mix and match it up. And when that's all dried, I'm going to take some Stormhost Silver, and again, I'm going to dry brush it onto the axe blade and onto the chain mail that he's got. This stippling really just, you know, brings out the kind of rusted nature of the Typhus Corrosion, and, you know, you've got that nice texture, so it really pops. Now, final stretch. I won't do the base, but we'll just go over the last steps. or very last step rather. This is Army Painter Moondust, and I'm just going to apply it to the very tippy tops of my wounds. You know, I don't want to go too far in it, but I just want to make it look nice and putrid and almost glowing enough to really sell this model's grossness.
So there you have it. The Blight Kings were kind of the first models that I styled almost entirely towards, you know, actively using my airbrush to get through the bulk of the model, and I find that the results, along with the very minute washes, really give you quite a nice detailed appearance, you know, overall in really very little of the time. Which kind of felt like cheating to me, but you know, in this hobby, whatever works, works. And if it improves your workflow, and if it makes, not necessarily things a bit easier, but if it gives you results that you find are a bit more tangible and a bit more meaty, then I actively encourage you to go and try that out. This has been great. I hope you've really enjoyed it. If you want to know more about some of, you know, basics of airbrush, because a lot of my followers tend to veer more towards just the regular, like, you know, the physical brush aspect of things, please check out my video on my channel, which actually covers airbrushing for dummies, because up until 2 months ago, I was a complete dummy in it. I'm still learning as I go. It's not rocket science, but it can seem a bit daunting at first, so please check it out if you're unsure, and maybe you would like to invest in an airbrush as well. So maybe I can sway you there to get a cheap model. No? In the next Harks Paints video, however, we will be touching upon Necrons. So if you're interested in finding a more interesting way to work with metal tones other than just whack a shader on it, hopefully this video will be for you. So thank you very much. Like, comment, subscribe, check out the Instagram, check out the Facebook, check me out. I know you want to, so come on. And hopefully I'll see you next time.